As I said, we spent the better part of yesterday touring the facility, as well as conducting a few more interviews. We spent Tuesday a little bit of time with you in the morning, and then the bulk of Tuesday was more interviews, and then this morning we conducted our last interview. And so we've gained some impressions, some observations, not necessarily conclusions, because conclusions would require a lot more data analysis and collection, but we've got some preliminary thoughts about not only your building, but about use of alternatives and what you're doing. So we're going to break this up. Mark's an architect. He's going to take the facility side of the conversation, walk you through impressions and observations of your current building. Then I'm going to pick it up, and we're going to talk about alternatives and what I'm seeing with some of the data that's coming out of your system. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll go through that presentation if it's okay with you, and then we'll take our first formal break. Does that work? The scroll wheel does it. Do you want the handheld mic?
This is okay.
Okay, good. No, this one on the side.
Okay.
Down is up. Oh, well, there it is.
Down is up, okay.
Yes, down is forward.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Your facility is relatively small, but it's one of the more complicated ones that I've been in a long time, partially because it's, as you know better than me, it's evolved over time. The first part of it was built in '64. The first renovation and addition was in '84 and '85, and that brought it up to 72 beds. It had, what, 50-something beds to begin with, right? In '88, that's when the work release trailers were added. That added another 26 beds. And then the sheriff and law enforcement moved out in around 2004, and that part was renovated, adding about 39 beds. Currently, the rated capacity is 194, although 26 of those beds are work release beds, and we're going to go through challenges or they could be called challenges or problems or both. And one of the problems with the work release beds is that they're in a bad place, and which makes them very staff inefficient, and they're, as many of you know, they're currently closed, largely because they're so staff inefficient. Your square footage compared to other jails is actually on the low side, and that's partially because you have a relatively low number of single cells and two-person cells. You have mostly six-person, approximately multi-occupancy cells. You have one large dormitory, and you have less space in services and in admin and in programs compared to the number of the capacity that you have than many other jails. You've done many good things to manage the population, and Jim will talk more about that later. But as most of you know, you have a full array for a not so large county. You have a large array of specialty courts, and that's quite admirable. And community corrections, and both of those are having a major impact. And Jim will get into the numbers. Thanks for providing some of the data, Charisse, that was helpful. You would definitely need a lot more beds if you didn't have the specialty courts and community corrections. And the other thing you do when you're overcrowded is lease beds from other counties. You're fortunate that there are other counties that are relatively close that have available beds. We understand that situation isn't quite as convenient for those relatively few juveniles that need to be incarcerated, the distances are greater. And some of the people that we've met with this week have expressed a need to at least look at providing capacity for juveniles as well as adults here.
Pull it down.
Oops. Sorry. One disturbing thing to Jim and I is the number of places within your facility that we saw people sleeping on the floor, or preparation to have extra people sleep on the floor. Including in the intake area. There's one room where we understand people are there for as much as 72 hours. Not only do you need more beds, and many people who look at jails who haven't worked in jails think just about adding beds when there's not enough beds. But that's not not a realistic way to look at it, because the more inmates you have, the more medical services you have, the more meals you're serving, the more paperwork is involved. So the more people come through intake, the more people that are released. It impacts every function. And although you've done renovations and added more space over time, there's a number of areas that are too small, and that can negatively impact operations. We're not criticizing operations. We think operations is excellent in spite of all these crowding and space issues. Jim and I believe that you're doing the best job you can with a limited space, but as you can see from these two photos of medical and food services, that there's not enough space. Visiting is relatively small for the population, and we know it doubles for several other purposes. There's not enough interview areas. We've heard that sometimes there's people, like 15 people waiting in the small lobby to be able to interview inmates. There's too few opportunities, and most of your program space is in the basement, which is poorly located. New jails have program space either in or adjacent to the housing units, and that way those program spaces are used a lot more. If it's difficult to or if it creates safety and security problems to move inmates a distance to program areas, they tend to be used a lot less. The intake area is another one that has been expanded, but it still has problems. You can see into a few of the holding cells, but not into all of them, or you can, but you have to move around a lot. Ideally, there should be, from the booking station, you should be able to see into all the holding cells, because it's a very stressful time for inmates. And a lot of them can be come in on drugs or alcohol, may have some health issues, mental health issues. A lot of them are unknown. The numbers, you can't really control the numbers coming in, so it's an area that can get quite crowded. And it definitely needs more space and a different configuration than you have now. The Sally Port was supposedly designed for 2 vehicles, but it's one would have to be behind the other, and it really is too small for 2. Plus, even if it was longer, one would block the other one. So newer sally ports have vehicles next to each other rather than behind each other. The layout is really poor, and also because of the housing units being relatively small, it's staff inefficient, and staff are not able to be in housing units or see inmates directly much of the time. Newer jails have larger housing units and are more likely to have staff in those housing units, which works a lot better. All the research supports that direct supervision works better than linear indirect supervision for staff and for inmates. The biggest problem with work release is its location. That you have to move people, or staff would have to go back and forth because work releases often work evenings or weekends. Some staff have to be in the building all the time, and consequently it's closed at the present time because it doesn't make sense to have a staff in a building with just 3 or 4 inmates during the day when most of the others are somewhere else. It's also, a temporary building. It wasn't intended as a permanent building, and in the long run, you need a better space for work release. That's attached. That's part of the jail to be more efficient. In my opinion, you're over-reliant on cameras. You have lots of cameras, and you need them. We understand why they were added, but they don't work as well as people observing inmates. You have lots of blind spots throughout, and again, you put them in good places. We're not criticizing you doing the best you can once again by putting cameras throughout the facility. It's just unfortunate that you need so many when direct observation by staff works better than cameras. Especially with your control room staff also answering the phone and watching lots of cameras at the same time. As good as they are and as well trained as they are, they may not see everything that they need to see. A lot of people think just about the number of beds, but it's important to think about the types of beds, the types of environments that are needed. It's just not having enough beds, and that's of course one of the reasons too why we justice consultants and the National Institute of Corrections recommend that you have more beds than your average population, and that's in order to be able to house people by their classification category, and also to be able to deal with peak populations, because again, you don't have that much control of how many people are in the jail, even with release mechanisms. But a lot of your cells are not appropriate for especially special populations like the mentally ill. They really, and we've heard that as many as 80% of your inmates are mentally ill. Many of them also have drug and alcohol problems. They do a lot better in direct supervision environments with small, secure windows, with natural light, with views, with more color. Even though you have a great indoor-outdoor rec area, it's healthier for mentally ill and for other folks to have real outdoor secure areas to go to too. Yes, it's not a Holiday Inn, but we need to treat people humanely, or they can get worse in facilities like this. Also, your female population is growing rapidly, and Many females do better in direct supervision units too. And those, if there are 48 beds or so, that could be just as staff efficient or even more staff efficient than what you have now. Another problem, and I'm glad that the maintenance manager or facility manager is here. You've replaced toilets and HVAC systems and so forth, but still you have a lot of old parts and systems, and it's hard to find replacement parts, or sometimes they're not available at all. Another major concern is all the cells that have elements that are the opposite of suicide resistant. It's good that you have all the cameras and that you've had relatively few suicides, but there's many opportunities in virtually all parts, all of the housing units, for inmates if they want to hang themselves to do that. The bar grade fronts are particularly problematic, but even the ladders that are in most of the cells can be problematic. There are a lot of positive features about the facility. Number one is how it's run. It's run extremely professionally. It's very clean. It certainly doesn't look, even the parts that were built in '64 look like the materials and finishes look like they're almost brand new. It's very clean, very well maintained. Another thing that Jim and I noticed when we walk through jails is how inmates behave, and your inmates seem to respect staff. They seem to be compliant. It reflects really positive on the jail administrators and on jail staff. One very unusual thing happened when Jim and I were walking through the other day. An inmate actually complimented maintenance staff for taking care of something right away. We rarely hear that. No. Another thing that's especially admirable about the building is the innovative indoor-outdoor recreation area. Jim and I have been to hundreds of facilities, and I don't know about you, but I haven't seen that before. It was really a good idea, and it seems to be working well. The renovation that was done around 2004, 2005 was really good, considering it's very challenging to renovate within basically what was offices before, where law enforcement was. The dorm and the two-level cell unit are really follow a lot of really good design principles. So that's a real positive about your building. Also, we understand that, and from what we can see, you meet all of Michigan and American Correctional Association standards for design. I'm going to turn it back to Jim to talk about alternatives, different ways that you're keeping your population down.